I'm the chair of Norello. Since you're in Nova Scotia, you should join.
Okay.
But that's part of ICANN.
I'm interested to.
I'll send right away.
Okay. Okay.
Right, I'll just take the agent keys off.
So, we're ready? Yep. Yep, we're ready. Okay, so Christopher, I'm going to start with you, then I'll go to Mokhtar.
Yes.
And then to Carlos. Right.
It's because there is one speaker
Alright.
that might be coming at some point.
All right, so
So that's why.
well, let's get Mokhtar down here, and it's fine either way. Okay. Come to Glen. Yeah, you might have to come in a little here.
Actually,
Right.
you can move.
Not much room.
Maybe not that much, right? I'm sorry. But this one has a little bit more room.
Okay, welcome everyone to a session on public Wi-Fi and open access models. My name is Steve Song. I'm from the Network Startup Resource Center, and I'm going to open the discussion by, well, perhaps with a provocation. In 2005, The Economist published an article that sort of declared a revolution that actually mobile networks were going to connect, especially Africa, rather than sort of traditional copper wire networks or other means, and that has proven to be a bigger initiative, a bigger movement, a bigger change than anyone I think could have dreamed. And it has become the kind of common understanding that simply, if we wait long enough, mobile networks will connect everyone. And I think for a number of years it was sort of regarded as kind of problem solved. But what we see now is that mobile networks are actually slowing in their growth and are experiencing challenges in extending their business models into sparsely populated rural areas. And we also see challenges with ability to pay and making access to communication affordable for all. So with that in mind, what we've seen in the last 12 to 24 months are some new things happening. So I just want to relate to you some news from the last 12 months in sub-Saharan Africa. So and this is all, with the exception of one or two, literally within the last 12 months. In Dakar, Sonatel announced free public Wi-Fi services. Lomé in Togo, free public Wi-Fi. Kenya, Poor Internet have just launched commercial Wi-Fi services in Kibera. Mwingu, which is a slightly older initiative, operates a rural Wi-Fi service. Liquid Telecom have launched over 350 hotspots in 9 counties in Kenya, and public libraries in Kenya are also offering free public Wi-Fi access. In Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, just 2 weeks ago, the government announced a free public Wi-Fi service following on the news from Uganda, where the Ugandan government is now offering free public Wi-Fi after hours in the greater Kampala region. Project Link, which is a metro fiber network in Kampala, have also launched a wholesale Wi-Fi network through the Kampala and Entebbe region, which has led to ISPs like Rock Telecom there offering 24 hours of access for 1,000 shillings or 30 cents. In Botswana, Bofinet are offering free public Wi-Fi in Haberoni and Francistown. Seychelles, Mauritius, well, both islands have launched free public Wi-Fi. In Rwanda, a mobile startup, Vanu, is offering Wi-Fi in rural areas. In Zimbabwe, Tel1 has over 600 hotspots, Wi-Fi hotspots, and Net1 offer public Wi-Fi. In South Africa, I mean, the list goes on, and you're actually going to hear about it from my colleagues here. But not just Wi-Fi in urban areas, but in townships, on buses, petrol stations, total petrol stations in South Africa offer free public Wi-Fi. Most of you will have heard of initiatives like Project Isizwe. So the question I hope we can discuss today is this a blip? Is this a sort of marginal add-on, or what is the role that these complementary technologies like Wi-Fi can play? And if they are relevant, what can we do to enable them? So, and I don't think, I want to emphasize that we're not limited to Wi-Fi in these discussions. There are many pilots going on with TV white space technologies, which is a Wi-Fi-like technology, but operating in unused television frequencies. Community fiber projects also springing up in South Africa, where communities, obviously wealthier communities, frustrated with the cost of access, are banding together to build their own access. And I haven't yet touched on bottom-up initiatives such as community Wi-Fi initiatives to provide access in underserved areas. So there's a lot going on, but it's almost like they succeed in spite of the obstacles that they face, obstacles such as regulatory frameworks that allow them to operate, or access to high-speed backhaul. So one of the key constraints around these networks is the cost of access to backhaul, and there's been a move by many governments towards open access networks around fiber optic backhaul, but has that actually brought the price down in order to enable the further spread of these initiatives? These are all questions that I hope we can dig into today. And with that, I'd like to turn over to our first speaker, Christopher Geerts from South Africa, who has recently conducted a study on behalf of Research ICT Africa on public Wi-Fi in South Africa.
Thank you, Steve. So what I'm going to do is, there's a lot of information I could answer, so we can do that in questions if you ask them. But in terms of this introduction, I'm going to focus on the study we did, which we started, and most of the desktop and the interviews were done actually about a year ago. So the time in between has been spent trying to get some quantitative demand research done with the providers. But I looked at nine main free public Wi-Fi projects. So what I focused on was not all the initiatives where commercial ventures are offering free Wi-Fi, which is a number, but specifically where the government has provided. And why we did this was to inform policy. In other words, if government says we need to create a more inclusive access environment using Wi-Fi, how could they do it? This would be the beginning of a discussion on how it could be done. So to look at the different models and see to what extent they are relevant in different contexts and what good practice we could tease out. So in the face of it, public Wi-Fi looks really exciting because more and more people are getting smartphones. The price is coming down quite dramatically. So what you end up is having people with basically a fairly powerful computer by the standards of a few years ago, walking around in their pockets. And now with Wi-Fi, those can be broadband enabled. So the vision is really exciting. So can one deliver on that vision of providing access in such an easy way which could make such a difference. And that was really the argument of the first of 3 case studies I just wanted to touch on, which is from an organization called Project Sizwe. So they developed South Africa's first large free Wi-Fi project in Tshwane, the capital city. And they argued that access is basically a human right. And because it's a human right, it should be provided by the government. And they said the cheapest way to deliver is by public Wi-Fi. If you use a smartphone or a tablet, you don't have to put in the money of the device because that's provided by the consumer. And if you use government buildings, they already have physical security, they already have connectivity, and they already have electrical power. So you can bring down the cost of providing the service quite dramatically. And then the service would actually be provided really around those government buildings within a 100 to 200 meter radius. So Project Sizwe is a non-profit organization, and they provide a turnkey solution. So they take a local authority through the entire process from planning, installing, managing, organizing, running, assisting with the branding, and then doing the content. It's basically a one-stop shop. All the local authority has to do, and it's a big all, is to pay. And payment is really on the high sites and the megabytes that go through. And in order to get involved, you'd have to have at least a 4 to 5 year, even a longer commitment to those payments. So with the first project just ending its 3rd year with 784 sites, what has worked well in Tshwane? I've tested the technology itself, and it works really well. For those of you who've had experience with public Wi-Fi, which is probably most of you at airports and in shopping centers and restaurants, this is actually an exceptional service. It offers users actually a better broadband service in Tshwane than many fairly rich suburbs have at their own houses around South Africa with a 15 megabit per second downlink. So the first sites chosen in that project 3 years ago were mainly on higher education campuses. And that gave them a bit of a publicity head start because students are an ideal target. They buy smartphones even if they can't always afford them. They learn quickly, they're social creatures, and they need the internet for their studies. So uptake was naturally very good. Reported impact was good by Sizwe, and the gender disparity in that particular group of uptake is less significant, let's say, than in the broader population. Another thing Sizwe have done really well is they have a superb content portal. And in fact, they won an award for one of the aspects of that 2 nights ago here at the conference. The content they have relates to education, health, employment, and it's offered on an unlimited basis. In other words, when you're accessing that content from their service, there's no limit to how many videos, etc., you can consume. And there's also a focus on local video content creation, which was the part that won the award, job creation and local content creation. Video information is interesting because it obviously doesn't require a high level of literacy to consume. So in summary, on the good side, Sizwe offers a really good turnkey model. In other words, if a local authority doesn't have any capacity or any background in Wi-Fi, they can soon be offering access in return for their dollars and their public buildings. So what was limiting in the model? Well, smartphone access on a street corner is good for information consumption and even video. But of course, it's fairly limiting if you want to do software coding or fairly complex operations which would require, let's say, a PC, in which case they've only had about 8.5% access via PCs on their project. The rest is mainly smartphones and tablets. So it's not really suitable for serious content generation. And also, you can't really access via homes or buildings. So for a small business, if you want to go out to the street every time you want to do a transaction, that's fine. Sizwe, they come in as experts and they run the project. So there's really minimal community participation, except perhaps on the content side. The network's not really open to other service providers. So once they've gone into an area and provided their service, it pretty much shuts out competition. And Sizwe's got a huge advantage now. They've got these high sites at reduced cost. They've got guaranteed income. And once a Wi-Fi network is entrenched, that network is actually providing interference, radio interference, if anyone else tries to come up and create a second Wi-Fi network. Customers are allocated a daily bundle of 500 megabytes, and that's allocated by their MAC address on their device, which is quite generous, especially because some of their content isn't being metered. But there's no way a customer can purchase additional. Once their 500 is finished, that's pretty much it. And that was an intentional design by Sizwe, which I see to be a mistake. I think that they're actually reviewing that plan now and seeing the potential to offer people a migration to a commercial service if they want to consume more data. It is also telling when one looks at South Africa that Sizwe, even though they've had very public, high-profile success on their project, have been unable to replicate it with any reasonable amount of scale around the rest of the country. And recently, unfortunately, they had to lay off staff. Also, Sizwe says they save money because they're non-profit, but they have a very significant operator underneath called Herotel, which is actually not non-profit. And we've seen Herotel grow on the back of Sizwe and now become an operator in its own right. So one has to look very carefully at governance issues, even when a company or an organization says that they're non-profit. Sizwe has said very strongly in the beginning, everything has to be free. That was a fundamental tenet of their launch. But now they're looking at other models, and they're also experimenting with Facebook with the free basics model, and that's worth looking at. So that was the first model. The second one I looked at was in Cape Town, and that's run by the city itself, which had a lot more capacity for doing its own project, having implemented its own fiber network already. This project focused as a pilot on two underserved areas very specifically, and on residents in general rather than on students. The city, with US grant funding, they looked at two areas, Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain, and they provide an open network. In other words, although it's Wi-Fi, it allows commercial internet service providers to offer a service on top of that. They actually have 3 providers. As long as those 3 providers fit in with their proviso that they offer a certain amount, which is 250 megabytes of free access per day to each user. And in fact, they set it can't be less and it can't be more. It has to be, they have to make the provision 250 megabytes. And those internet providers can then commercialize the service in whatever way they please over and above that. So what works with that model? Well, I believe that model fosters competition much more effectively, and it enables comparison of different business models. And indeed, when we looked at the stats coming in, you could see how they were learning through the process because each of the 3 ISPs was approaching it in a different way. So we got very interesting comparative data, which is available from Research ICT Africa in a publication they've done. And it informed what future models would look like, because this is really the beginning of a long journey of understanding. And if anyone asks, I can elaborate on some of that later. So what's limiting in their model? Well, technically they had a very quick amount of feedback that Wi-Fi doesn't penetrate very well into houses built of zinc, the galvanized iron sheets. There's no competition at the physical layer, which is now an issue because their project expansion has been so slow. It's still sitting at the pilot stage about a year after they intended to expand. What I've noticed is that once a city owns a network, it becomes a bit preoccupied with the network relative to fostering of competition in general. And the equipment to manage, needed in Wi-Fi to manage multiple providers has been a lot more expensive than if you just provided a single Wi-Fi network. In fact, it's several times the entry cost. And there is always a limit of 3 ISPs. You can't have unlimited commercial because of the limitations of Wi-Fi at the moment. So those were the constraints. And the third case study, which is actually the most interesting to me, and it's in fairly early days of their rollout, is the Western Cape provincial government. Now the province doesn't have fibre rolled out, and they have a very sparse population. So up until today, very few people on the private sector had ventured into the rural areas because of the high risk and low returns. So what the government did was they actually reduced the risk via PPP, a public-private partnership, to roll out fibre, and they put that out to tender, and that was won by the operator called Neotel. And what they could do is they could not buy the fibre, but actually use the fibre under this agreement to connect all government buildings. And by doing the private-public partnership, they could bring down the price to less than half of what it would have cost just to go out to tender, in return for guaranteeing their own usage, their own demand as the anchor tenant with all their government buildings for a certain number of years. And that's a model, not only that model, but the idea of reducing risk, which I see as the most promising going forward with Wi-Fi, rather than just providing a free service. Free Wi-Fi coverage was actually really added as an extra on this project, which was essentially a fibre project. So government would pay for the Wi-Fi usage on a per megabyte basis. The operator, Neotel, would remain the owner of the hotspots, and they in fact are able to offer other services commercially at their own discretion on those sites. And initially the pilots involved one hotspot in each district to make sure that there was coverage across the whole area. So what works in that model? Well, I think what works is to leverage the capital and resources of the private sector. The way to get their interest in moving into these areas is to reduce risk. And I think the future of public Wi-Fi is finding innovative ways to reduce the risk. And government's main question should be, how can we reduce the risk to make these areas more interesting? Now, there are other ways of getting income, as you know, from public Wi-Fi or a return, including advertising, and including, in fact, what's considered the most valuable is analytical information. And by that, I'm referring to legitimate analytical information, which, for example, where bus routes should go based on human movement, etc. Now, the province, by going with this partnership, they were actually able to deploy much more quickly, because rather than themselves developing the capacity, they just put in penalty clauses and they forced Neotel to roll out extremely quickly. So the uptime of that project was extremely quick. Neotel is still able to innovate. And the government can stipulate that those sites are open access, so they don't have to restrict competition at the service provision level. What doesn't work? Well, I'm not saying this doesn't work, but potentially is restrictive in the future, and that's the monopoly element. But Neotel now has a huge provincial network, and it's very difficult for another operator to compete and emulate that without having been given that head start. Now, unfortunately, with that project, because it was a fibre project, the Wi-Fi actually took second seat. And although the province itself did a lot of research on the benefits, the social benefits of Wi-Fi, in reality, when council met, they were much more concerned about the big project, the Wi-Fi project, and they were much more concerned about saving costs and the progress of the fibre. So Wi-Fi got a bit of a backseat, but hopefully once it's all deployed, they can go back and re-look at the Wi-Fi and have another look at expediting rollout of the Wi-Fi specifically. So those are my three models. And then just in conclusion, if I could add three more conclusions, because altogether I actually looked at 9 projects. The one is, as I've said, I support a private sector model to drive growth. Not exclusively, but across most of the areas where there's a marginal potential benefit. Finding ways to turn that marginal benefit into a real benefit for the private sector. We have, for example, in South Africa, a wholesale Wi-Fi operator called Vast Networks. And they're more than willing to to expedite rollout to huge expanses of the country, if they can find a model where it works for them, and government should be engaging them to see how to do that. The other thing I noticed when I looked at all my 9 projects was they were focused on the wealthiest 2 provinces out of the 9. In fact, they were in the wealthiest 2 provinces. The other 7 really weren't touched. And when you look at the projects that Steve was talking about, they tend to be in the capital cities, I think with the exception mainly of Kenya, and even where it's 9 provinces. And again, they were only in the wealthiest 2 metropoles, because even though it was in 4 cities, 2 of the city clusters in South Africa are all connected. So the rest of the country is pretty much untouched at this stage. Even then, a few of the high sites that were done as part of the projects are in fairly rich areas. So we're still a long, long way from talking equitable or inclusive access. It's very hard for the smaller cities and towns to justify Wi-Fi spend at the moment in the face of abject need and extreme poverty. I know that many of you would disagree and say Wi-Fi is still important, but that we're preaching here to the converted. I'm talking about when you're facing an audience out in the real world that is faced with, potholes, roads being non-existent, lack of clinics, water issues, sanitation issues. How do you put Wi-Fi onto the agenda? And that seems to be why Wi-Fi has ended up being restricted to the big cities. Then I noticed that a good project requires good planning. And this is my final point. So that would involve initially an integrated smart city type of initiative, good governance, low corruption, adequate capacity to deploy. And when you look at a Wi-Fi project and invest and evaluate it, there's quite a strong link to the underlying fiber projects that are in the area. And that's actually my quick way of evaluating now. If you see a successful fiber project, for example, in your case, Steve, I'd say Liquid Telecom have deployed successfully, you're likely to see a successful Wi-Fi project very close behind. So that's almost like a proxy of and very useful in the debate to link the two in your understanding. So that's my final point, and I'm happy to answer questions on the other 7 projects or anything else about Wi-Fi and how it relates to other technologies.
Thank you, Chris. I think, that point about fiber and Wi-Fi is tremendously important. One, from the point of view that the marginal cost of adding Wi-Fi, if you own fiber, is like 0.0001%. Wi-Fi is so cheap in comparison that it's just an easy win. And because of the capacity of fiber, it doesn't have an impact on other services. The other thing is, and this comes back to your point, I think that the reason, for me, the reason why Wi-Fi hasn't extended out of the major metropolitan areas is because the cost of national backhaul. Any country you travel to in sub-Saharan Africa, you will talk to them and they'll tell you that it costs more to get data to the coast or to the point of exit of the country than it does to get it all the rest of the way to Europe. So lowering the cost of fiber backhaul is deeply implicated in the success of Wi-Fi beyond urban centers. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Mokhtar Yadali to get a perspective from the African Union.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to apologize. I will just speak quickly and then step out. So you will not have a chance to ask me any questions. I have an expected urgent matter to take care of. But I will take it from the point where we just finished, the link between the big pipes, the big transmission canals with the development of Wi-Fi. This is where we are actually. The African Union, our business mainly is about considering the macro big projects integrating the continent itself rather than going into the nitty-gritty national small project in general. Sometimes because of those actors that did not fulfill their missions, we step in and we try to see how we can supplement that deficit in terms of providing connectivities. While we are looking at big projects in interconnecting the continent, we start lately worried about the unconnected because we believe that in most of the countries, the universal access strategy policies have failed and even sometimes have been abused for specific matters that are not really in the interest of the citizens themselves. And we're just starting, rethinking the way to provide connectivities to those unconnected in terms of linking it with the electrical or power projects we do have in the continent. Indeed, the African Union do have a big project called PIDA, which is the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, which has three major components, actually four major components: water, electricity, transport, and specifically ICT. Mind you that many years ago, we have designed an African satellite that is now launched, which is called RASCOM, that had a small solution about a small antenna that doesn't cost too much, has specific links, and can provide internet access, be it through Wi-Fi or any other technology surrounded that. But the big pipe was provided because at that point of time, we thought that private sector will not go into places where the return on investment will be so low. Number two, although the coverage is there, the access is not provided either because the devices are expensive or are not put in place to make sure that those surrounding that access point are not connected. So from that point of view, we are emulating what we were preaching in terms of empowering communities to provide electricities through digital platform, which is actually a new way of conceiving economy horizontally rather than vertically at all. And allowing people to produce electricity and sell them to others around would be a policy that will be much, much encouraging, not on the big cities, but all in the remote and specific areas. This is one of the biggest concerns. The second concern for us is once we provide the access to the population without being somebody who is dictating what they have to do or not to do, we wouldn't like to find ourselves in a position whereby the Wi-Fi or the infrastructure or access provided is being used for something that is not, quote unquote, useful. And we have noted that, for instance, in India recently, one of the biggest hub station has been, because it has a Wi-Fi, become the porn hub. Would that be something appropriate for Africa or Africans in general, without, again, and it's very important, dictating what the behavior should be or the content should be? We think it is our responsibility to make sure that once the access is provided, is used for the well-being and for the socioeconomic development. And latest question we are actually facing most of the time is, once again we provide the access by, no matter how scheme, PPP, public, private, whatever it is, the OTT issue comes again here. Why would we provide access or infrastructure while somebody was riding on those without actually paying anything for the service they are providing or so on? So this is the major points from the African Union point of view. I am sorry I wouldn't be able to answer to those questions. Some of them might be controversial, but I will apologize and just step out.
I'm not sure we can let you go after making those provocative statements. That you should determine what useful content is, and that and the issue of free riding over OTT.
Indeed.
I feel like we have a whole session right there on that.
Indeed.
But if you must go, well, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very much, again, apology again.
Well, that's a lot of food for thought. With that, I'd like to turn over to Carlos Rey Moreno, who's based at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa and is one of the instigators of a community wireless network in the Eastern Cape, Zenzeleni Networks. Carlos.
Okay. I prefer to do it. No. Okay, sorry about this. Yeah, actually, well, as Steve has said, I'm a postdoc fellow at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. And as part of my research, I've been involved in the creation of sensor learning networks that is a community-owned and maintained internet service providers in probably the other side of the world, in the unequal South Africa from the big capital cities that Chris was talking about. In Mankosi, access to water, electricity, and other services is scarce. For instance, only 3% of the households are connected to the grid, and 5% of them has resources to collect rainwater, so they don't have to go to the river or to communal water points that they barely work. That is because the income per person are 15% of the national average. So people can't afford private access to those resources. In terms of communications, Mankosi is covered by 2 mobile operators, and nearly everyone owns a mobile phone. The fact that many family members emigrate to other parts of South Africa to work in the mines or in the farms, or access to better education, makes communication a priority for many of them, as they want to be in touch with the people that they care. Such a priority makes that people spend 22% of their disposable income in communications, many times forgoing food to do so. So the valid proof of the mobile communications that Steve was mentioning might not be working in some places. Sadly, it is very common to hear that many people having to make the choice in between making a call or eating. And although it's a massive percentage of their disposable income, it only allows them to access a very basic basket of services with less than 20 calling minutes a week. In this context, Sensor Learning Network, which was bootstrapped with the assistance of my university, is providing services to try to reducing this cost of communications. To do so, they installed and are operating a solar-powered wireless mesh network that initially provided free voice calls among 10 publicly accessible analog phones spread in the community. Additionally, the community decided to use the spare energy produced from the solar systems to create a public access mobile phone charging station. With that money they get from the charging those phones, they are able to cover the maintenance cost of the networks. And those services were later upgraded to provide calls to national and international numbers for a fraction of the prices offered by incumbent operators, thanks to aggregating demand and accessing wholesale pricing. Even though Sensor Learning Networks is able to offer voice over IP calls at 1/6 of the prices offered by incumbent operators, they might not be able to reduce this cost for everyone, as only 1/3 of the people own smartphones and very few decide to use analog phones. Reducing the cost of voice communications would be straightforward if the communities had access to unused GSM spectrum, as probably Eric would tell you in a second. From the 4 main providers in the country, only 2 are providing nationwide coverage. The other 2 are only focused in big metros. In particular, the one owning a spectrum in the 9 MHz band only covers 25% of the national territory and roams to another one of the 2 providers in the rest. And it doesn't seem that this situation is going to change with the slowdown of GSM rollout in the country. If communities could use that GSM spectrum, and considering that the same number of calls is currently made, the cost of voice communications could be reduced from 22% to 3%. A coalition of civil society organizations and individuals that are present in this room at the moment presented this proposal to Parliament 3 months ago. And we are waiting for feedback, although it seems very positive and we are making quite a lot of strides into that direction. In terms of data provision, they are about to make it happen thanks to a Beyond the Net grant from ISOC to upgrade the infrastructure and connect to the fiber in a close-by city, in a town that is 60 kilometers away, and provide internet access from a set of hotspots in the community. To tackle the lack of Wi-Fi-enabled devices, 2 laptops will be made available, 2 solar-powered laptops will be made available in those hotspots so community members can benefit from accessing to that data. They are also working with the school and the high school to repurpose their computer rooms. The Department of Education set up those computer rooms in 2013, but they have been barely used since then. In both cases, they are working with them to understand what are the barriers that are preventing them from using those computer rooms and provide them with ICT training to overcome them, including, among other things, security online, and local content creation. Something similar to this public access to the internet came very strongly in the first summit of community networks in Africa that took place 2 weeks ago in Nairobi, where public access appeared as a common feature across the 10 community networks that were represented there. In all cases, as self-learning networks will do, the cost of the service is decided by the community, but are always as cheap as possible so they can cover the operational cost. So with the community networks model, we are talking about moving beyond affordable access. We can see with the example of the free computers in the school. Nothing has happened until the community has taken the matter into their hands. So we are talking about creating a local economy, about creating or providing digital skills, generating local content, and actually giving the communities the opportunity to have a sovereign agency about their developmental process and affairs. Thus, and to answer the question that was said in this panel, if we talk about universal access, in the context of South Africa, this model is complementary to GSM networks. But if we talk about universal affordable access, this model, complemented with small changes in the regulatory environment, could actually rival with other models that are out there. But if we look beyond affordability, and the goal is to take communities outside that circle of poverty and disempowerment that they are trapped into, community networks seems to me as the only solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. I think that is a fundamentally essential point, that there appears to be spectrum scarcity, that in fact there is a lot of spectrum that is unused, and the current model we have for assigning spectrum is not allowing communities in rural areas to solve their own problems. And what we've seen in the explosion of Wi-Fi services across sub-Saharan Africa is not because Wi-Fi is such an amazing, valuable piece of spectrum, just the opposite. But because it's a very narrow piece of spectrum, but it's because it doesn't require permission to use, and so it allows for self-determination. What Vint Cerf calls permissionless innovation, which doesn't mean there are no rules, right? It just means that the rules are embedded in the technology, so the devices have to play nicely with each other. And this is a new paradigm I think we're facing in terms of how spectrum can be managed. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Eric Huerta from Rhizomatica, who have actually, I think, taken one of the biggest innovations forward in spectrum regulation, and I won't steal his thunder and let him tell you about that.
Just as a favor, can we move a bit for? I tend to use a lot my hands, and I don't want to disturb that computer that says no mover, no. Yeah. Sorry, because of my voice, it seems that the party was good. It was hard yesterday. Still can talk very much. Actually, I will talk. When they invite me to this panel, I say, why did they invite me to this panel? No? But then I quickly accept the invitation, because on this experience of developing GSM networks in rural communities, and also before, like looking at the policy of social coverage in telecommunications, I have faced myself a lot with some different programs along these years of information society, and now it seems like the kind of branding programs of many governments is open access Wi-Fi. No, we have like thousands of public access places, and many governments says that or advertise that as one of the greatest achievement of its policy. But I think we can look at it carefully, and I will talk about 3 experiences that just in this way I have faced with. One is from Mexico, the other is from Colombia, and the other is from Nicaragua. No? And I will focus on rural areas and public access in rural areas. In my the first case in Mexico, some of the rural areas, the only connectivity that could be at this point, at some point, give to those areas are satellite connectivity. No? So you arrive there, and the government has done a big effort. I don't know how efficient it's that. Still, someone might hear is taking some statistics on that. Can tell you better. But it's around 30,000 antennas deployed along Mexico. And what I've found in some of these rural places are some of these antennas that connect a school, for instance. Then the school have to give public Wi-Fi as well. No? So if you need to use the Wi-Fi, you get close to the school, and then you can use this public Wi-Fi. But in those cases, really the connectivity of the Wi-Fi connectivity is really poor. You can hardly do anything. You can hardly download a document. It might take you some minutes or 10 minutes to send an email, and if you're lucky, you can send some message in your WhatsApp. But well, this still allows some communication to some village that where the satellite connectivity cannot be afforded. There you have some other cases, like Colombia, where they have almost all the municipalities connected to fiber. And then they also have a program of public access within that fiber, and it seems that works really well. And the last one I like to talk about, and this is more like a vivid experience. I went because we have been collaborating in developing one of these GSM networks in Nicaragua, in a very, very isolated place. It's in Bluefields. Bluefields is like the English-speaking part of Nicaragua near the Caribbean, and naturally has been a very difficult place to access. You know? Both, I don't know why, probably because it has been easier. It's close to a sea cable. A sea cable comes to that area of Bluefields. So I went to a community that from Bluefields I have to go by boat, probably within the river of that, or lagoon. It's called Pearl Lagoon, this community, and it's really, really in the deep. Well, probably would be, it's like a 2-hour boat. Then you got there. And then I went to the park in the city, and I found that I could have video and send videos, download photos really quickly. So and it was a public Wi-Fi in the park. Actually, it came to my mind like some other philosophical issues of the internet, like. I mean, because in the park, like everybody, instead of playing, was like that with this mobile, no? Well, that would be bad for another chat. But the connectivity was great, no? And then when we went have a meeting with the people of the GSM network, one of the problems was the connectivity thing. So I said, how does that happen? I mean, it's not a problem of connectivity, because it seems that these guys have fiber here in the public access area, but they couldn't get connectivity to connect the network so that they could send calls outside of their own network. No? And so I think that is like a very deep point of reflection when we talk about public access Wi-Fi. Shall we be looking at public access Wi-Fi, or do we have to look further? We do have to look to connectivity, not to public access, because, well, I think there are like 3 levels of user in a network, no? Probably, and I think it has been mentioned at the beginning. You have a user, probably like myself, that just use that to send emails and allow things and doesn't do much stuff with the internet. But if you are like software coding on that, then you need another type of connectivity. No? Then you need probably some connectivity more secure, more capacity, have to be to do that, to create, to program, to create or to do programming. And then there is another layer of user that is the one that can expand the network and build the network. So, for instance, in Colombia, I have the chance to talk with someone from the minister, and she was telling me these wonderful things about this program. And then I asked her, hey, how does a community can connect to that fiber in the municipalities to take that connectivity to other cities that are farther, that are not are farther in are far from the municipality? And she said, I don't know. No? But she was the one in charge of that program. No? So, I think that I have to look this thing of to look to this thing carefully. No? There are some places that the only thing that you can do is to have some public access because there's no other way to connect, to do connectivity, and then you with a satellite connection, and that's a best effort. No? It probably doesn't work very well, but it's a best effort in connecting the people and giving the basic service. But when you have fiber there, when you have fiber, why you stop the community of doing the best use of the internet or scaling to other layers of user? Artificially, you are creating a barrier, even though there you have fiber there. So can we say that the governments, by doing this, are accomplishing really with internet access? Or actually blocking internet access to communities? So we have to be very careful when we evaluate those policies from the perspective of a researcher and from the perspective of a policymaker. We don't have to say, oh, okay, it's that. And then the question comes to me, is that something intentional? Or is that just ignorance? And I think that this can sort of the mixture of both things. Sometimes it is intentional because we think that we shouldn't compete, that sometimes some of these are state networks. I say, no, we shouldn't compete with the operators. But the problem here, and we'll talk especially with the case that I saw in Nicaragua, no? So they cannot get access to the fiber of this government fiber, but they can neither their access to the submarine cable there, because they said, no, well, you have to pay, you have to buy like 5 gigabits. And this guy says, hey, we have only 2 megabits or something, no? So we don't need that. I said, no, I cannot sell you that. I have to sell you 5 gigabits. So, and then it comes like, within the intentional, the mixture of ignorances. I said, there is a market there that the big operators doesn't get interest in that. So you have to enable those other operators the conditions to, these community operators, the conditions to expand the network. That is in the case of Senseleni. No? And so on, it won't happen anything to the big operator. You won't bother him if you allow or give these people access to 2 or 3 megas that they need to operate. You know? And also the thing is that sometimes governments doesn't care because it is popular to say, we have 1,000 of public access points. But probably those public access points, even though they are giving some good services to their users, and the user is very happy to go there and send emails and send WhatsApp and images or download videos, while this is happening, they are stopping other people to make a better use of or not a better use of another use of the internet in programming or in expanding the networks. So so I think that is what we should be looking at is connectivity, not public Wi-Fi. And what we should be looking at, if we are really granting access to the internet to people, or we just trying to show off something that it's not really efficiently done. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I think that the point about fiber is fundamental. People talk about fiber as if it were just one of a range of technologies: fiber, wireless, copper, etc. But fiber is a different category of technology because its capacity is relatively infinite. It is the deep water port of access. So when governments think about deploying fiber infrastructure, they often mimic the private sector model, which is to extract as much value as possible from the network. But that's not the strategy you have for roads, right? When you deploy roads, you want as much traffic going on that road as possible to enable the economic development of your country. And if you were to actually cost out fiber according to its lifespan of 15 to 20 years and the terabits and terabits of capacity that it represents, a gigabit connection across your country, the actual infrastructure cost maybe $1, $50, something like that. That were there a more strategic approach to fiber, that we would then see an unleashing, not just of public Wi-Fi, but of community efforts and private sector. Anyway, I see the moderator. So I'm a stand-in moderator here today, standing in for Alison Gilwald. And I wonder, Alison, if you wanted to offer any remarks.
Disrupting the panel. I just wanted to respond firstly to what Eric said, but then just make a comment about how this fits into our efforts within global governance more generally and the regional impacts of our regional bodies on our policy outcomes. So we're saying all these wonderful things here, but they're not translating into our environments. So I just firstly wanted to say, I really don't think it's fiber or public Wi-Fi or whatever. I think it's just about leveraging the different resources that are out there as optimally as we can in a resource-constrained environment. And I think that's really the mindset that we need to try and get buy-in to, because it's no use us coming here every year and firstly talking among ourselves, or talking at our governments or people who, quite honestly, despite the multi-stakeholderism, don't feel engaged and don't feel that there is no ownership of these processes. So we speak about them, and that you get the kind of pushback that you saw today. So I was responding specifically, for those of you who weren't here, to Mokhtar Yadali's input from the African Union, which I'm perfectly aware of. We work with them a lot on a lot of initiatives. And there have been a number of really devastating or retrogressive decisions taken by the African caucus in the ITU and in forums like this around spectrum, around OTTs, for example, and this kind of conventional wisdom that OTTs are, a bad thing, that they are actually taking away revenues from operators. So in the face of extensive evidence that OTTs in a changing environment for mobile operators that adopt these platforms and drive their data revenues and abandon their attempts to hold on their voice revenues, etc., are very successful. And yet you're still getting it. There have been a number of workshops that I've been in this week with governments, African governments, that are still being engaged in this forum saying these things. So I just wanted to say that because I think he's not stayed to defend himself. So but I think we do need to address it, and I think it's really important. There are a whole lot of things that are happening globally where we all kind of drinking our own Kool-Aid, and then we get very surprised when election results and spectrum plans and various things don't happen up like we expected them to. So I just wanted to say that, and I just think OTT is as much an issue here in terms of trying to get governments to not make decisions that will actually have these devastating unintended consequences for this project that we're involved in, this connectivity project that we're involved in at the global level.
Thank you, Alison. I think I'll give the panel an opportunity just to react to their colleagues very briefly, and then we'll take input from the floor. Christopher.
I'll wait for the question.
Okay.
For me, just maybe to add up one experience with relation to access to fiber. When it took us 4 years to get where we are in terms of accessing fiber in a university that is 60 kilometers away, and providing access to data in the school and the high school, when we were talking to the providers that were in the area, they were offering us 1 megabit per second at 350 megabits, at $350. That's 1 year ago in South Africa. I've been hearing people from DRC talking about $500 US, and this is today. So there are some places where this capture of fiber infrastructure is happening. In Mankosi, there is fiber 5 kilometers away from us. It's a political decision not to regulate that fiber for those 5 megabit per second or 10 megabit per second that Mankosi is going to use overall. So I just...
Thank you. Can we have the mic over here, please?
Yeah, Steve Zeltzer from LaborNet APC in San Francisco. I think this is a good discussion, but there's some problems here. San Francisco is one of the biggest high-tech cities in the world, and there's been a fight for municipalization of Wi-Fi. Who is opposing that? It's Comcast. It's these media monopolies who really control telecommunications in the United States. So we have a situation in the United States where these media monopolies are passing legislation to prevent communities from having public Wi-Fi. Why? Because they want to protect their revenue stream, even if poor rural communities in the United States are not able to get public Wi-Fi. So that's something we have to confront. Monopoly capital does not want small, poor communities to have Wi-Fi because it's not profitable for them. That's what we're really talking about. Now, the other question is Facebook, and I'm surprised it hasn't been brought up in this panel here, because Facebook says it is providing public access. And we learned at the IGF last year in Brazil that Facebook says they're providing free internet access, zero-based asset, but in reality it's a scam, it's a fraud. They're not providing free access. They provide you Facebook, and then if you want to continue to get internet, you have to pay service fees. And they're marketing this. They've gotten the internet.org to market this domain, to market their plan for making profits out of the internet. Our view is we need public community access, public Wi-Fi that cannot be controlled by the corporations, these media corporations. Their drive is not for public access. Their drive is to develop profit streams, and that's counter to what we believe our interests are. In San Francisco, other communities in the United States, there could be public access, there could be public Wi-Fi, but that's a threat to these media companies, and that's something we have to face on a global level. Thank you.
Thank you. In the back there, the bald man with the beard.
Hi, Marcelo Saldanha from Brazil. I make a question to reflect and comment. Why not create a digital city organized by a municipality law that makes possible mechanisms to sustainability and democratic governance? This is a question. And can we agree that community networks could be a part of digital cities? Two questions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a few questions and then ask the panel to respond. Over to the left in the back there.
Thank you. My name is Tony. My question and concern is on the public Wi-Fi access. Looking at the rural communities who may not be having the last point or the last mile of the fiber connection, how are we going to address this kind of issue at a national level? And if we address it at national level, how are we going to make them be aware that they are able to access this kind of national concern? Thank you.
Thank you. Take Mike Jensen there, and then just in front.
Thanks. Mike Jensen, Association for Progressive Communications. I just wanted to react to a couple of points that were made by the panelists. First, on the OTT thing, I think we can't just blame the governments. I think a lot of the operators in Africa have really pushed for some sort of regulator. I mean, classic example is at the ITU Global Symposium for Regulators last year in Gabon, which was sponsored by Airtel, one of the largest operators in Africa. They sponsored it very nicely, giving everyone, all 500 people, a tablet and a mobile phone and everything. This allowed the chief executive of Airtel to stand up at the beginning of the conferences and say, I hope you regulators will stop these people from eating our breakfast every day. So you can see that there's a kind of motivation from that area that needs to be addressed. The other point I wanted to consider is the one that was suggested by the representative from Brazil about this maybe municipal public access Wi-Fi isn't mutually exclusive with community networking. I thank very much Eric for highlighting the issue that is present currently, and I think as the cost of backhaul goes down, I think it's kind of inevitable that people will see the provision of access as a commodity, a basic type of infrastructure that should be provided by municipalities, just like access to water or electricity. So how can we take that motivation and not undermine community efforts? And I think that's a particular point. And then finally, on the issue of kind of provision of public Wi-Fi by the private sector, yes, I think we need to develop some kind of metric around how these private operators are motivated, whether it's by a kind of free basic model, where you get like a limited text-based service. There's some free Wi-Fi operators, such as in Sierra Leone, that provide free Wi-Fi, but only to text. Then you have to pay if you want to get video. So is there some model there that could be promoted, or should we be looking at something more generic, like the great idea for a free, slow broadband service that could be provided by any operator at minimal cost? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more comment just here, and then I'll invite the panelists to respond.
Hi, thank you. I'm Salanieta Tamanikoimaro from Fiji, Sala for short, and I'll speak in my personal capacity. I note the remarks made by the Latin American panelists and the South African panelists, very interesting, and those made from the floor. In the Pacific, we have a hybrid of in terms of backhaul, like we have both satellite, CNKU band across the Pacific Islands, as well as fiber. But in terms of, I note that the most recent speaker, was it Mike Jensen? Yes. He mentioned that, you know, as backhaul costs are decreasing, we're seeing the reverse in the Pacific. In fact, backhaul costs are increasing, not decreasing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is IP transit costs in the developing world, particularly from the Pacific. And in Oceania, we have 27 countries and territories that are assigned country code top-level domains. As IP transit costs are increasing, this is passed off to the consumers. Now I'd like to zoom into one country in particular, which is mine, Fiji. We have instances where governments had legislated things like excess deficit, particularly to provision and encourage the telcos to take, in terms of the last mile, and to provide access into underserved regions. But what we're finding is, because of the increasing IP transit costs, increasing backhaul costs, despite competition, in spite of competition, we're still seeing a reneging and sort of a telcos and ISPs and operators, third-tier operators as well, are sort of reluctant to provide public Wi-Fi or to provide access. So in terms of, I pretty much like the suggestion that you said, can we have like a dedicated community access open water? Some of the ways we can do that. Perhaps one of the ways we can certainly do it is discussions such as this, is things that could sort of go up, given that you have different sorts of people who have global areas of influence, regional areas of influence. But in terms of on the ground, perhaps one of the things that, in cases where government has reneged on excess deficit, perhaps one of the things we could do is consider tax incentives, or to consider particularly the operators, first-tier operators that are providing a backhaul, whether these are satellite or, and I know for the education research networks like RNet, there's already a reduction, a discounted premium cost. But perhaps one of the things we could do is to explore how we could increase access by providing stimulus. Thank you.
Thank you. So, some difficult questions there. I mean, are there things we can do with municipal bylaws? Are there other models we could look at for municipal access? And how do we address fiber at a national level? I want to make a brief comment about national fiber networks and then turn over to my colleagues. I think we face a conundrum with national fiber networks in many countries where they're either built and run by the private sector, where a scarcity model prevails and the maximum amount of value is extracted from those fiber networks, or they're built by the state, but the state often doesn't have the capacity to run them well, or more importantly, when it comes to pricing, they are reluctant to do anything but match whatever the private sector is pricing. And I think one answer to that might be to open up the ownership of those state-owned assets to smaller operators, not just the large mobile network operators, but allow a consortium to emerge, as they have done on undersea cables, to allow small ISPs to go from being renters, sharecroppers on these national fiber backbones, to owners. And the difference, once you become an owner, can be profound, because then you can choose how to amortize your costs over what period, as opposed to simply paying whatever the market rate is. And I think that would unlock those state assets in a way that would then relieve the government of the burden of risk and taking, perhaps decisions that they're not ready to take in terms of pricing, but allowing more flex among the different players in the market. So, who would like to respond to some of those questions? Eric, I see you.
Well, I want to talk a bit about economy. We always said, and this is a phrase that always comes in policy and regulation at telecommunications: the market failure. We have to go where there is a market failure. But the thing is to see if there is really a market failure, or which market are we talking about. I like there's an author called Braudel that has a book on architecture of economy. And Braudel, what it says is there are 3 layers of economy: the global economy, the local economy, and the subsistence economy. And each economy has a capacity. So, is not about the failure of the market, because the market is integrated in these three layers of economy. So, but if we want to put some company that works well in a global environment and make that company go and work in the subsistence environment, it's gonna fail. And if that company don't want to go to that place. The same way, if we want to put a company of a subsistence market to go into a global market. So what do we need to do? If we are from the subsistence market to go up to the global market, we have to be integrated and aggregated this small. So, for instance, if there is a local, like a local network like Senseli, wants to get into the market of a fiber, that it's a global market. Then he has to aggregate many small operators like him, and probably, as I said, where they are able to build a part of the fiber or make us partners in a fiber, and that's it. But for the same, in the same case, if there is a company that wants to serve a subsistence market, have to break its network or the administration of the network, so that there is a company, a small company in the subsistence market that can make that approach. So it's very important to stop framing that way the thing, the failure of the market. No, it's the failure and the barriers that we have set to some stages of the market to allow participating in their own market. So their regulations sometimes doesn't, and their regulation that it means the access to fiber, to access to essential elements as spectrum and fiber, the regulation blocks them, and there is not a failure of the market. Because the market is there, allowing these small companies to get into that market and bring services. It's a failure of the regulation. Okay.
Yeah. Well, amazing point. I would like to talk about what Tony said and the gentleman from the United States with regards to the fight that these type of models receive from monopolies and big companies, and how the government could enable what Tony was saying, how people would know. And I think there is an important effort that these community-owned initiatives need to do to try to fit in the regulatory framework. And although it's important what Eric was saying about probably different regulatory environments for the different economies, at the moment they don't exist. So trying to fit in the current regulatory framework that only plays into that space of one single economy, no matter they are different, it's very important. And I think, at least on our case, we have managed to fit in the regulatory framework. So no matter how many battles we are given by the operators, we have played by the same rules and apply to the same law as they are doing. And in that sense, I think, and to go to Tony's point, I think it's very important to make governments aware that community networks or municipal networks are enabling other types of access and enabling other type of solutions for places where the market is failing, probably because there are other economies. So actually they promote these models as well. They don't see these models as evil. They don't see that the only way, as Steve was saying at the beginning of the session, that the only way for provision of services under resource settings are mobile networks. So I think there is a lot on our plate to show that we are making the effort to play their game, but that they could play some of our game as well, and that would have very important synergetical impacts in making these solutions available and transforming the society the way I think these initiatives want to be transformed.
Thank you, Carlos.
I'm going to go a slightly more practical route rather than get into the very high level global politics and policies. Luckily in my life, I've lived through a couple of liberating markets opening changes. The first was when markets were actually liberalized and governments used to manage telcos, but they were told you can no longer. I used to have to drive to work on the weekends when I was in a small town to make phone calls to my family because the government-owned telco wouldn't put a phone in my house. Luckily, that ended in the 90s. So that was a huge wave of change. The next wave of change I saw was when mobile operators started to compete with the fixed operators. And especially in Africa, that changed the horizon completely. Not only because it offered mobility, but because it offered multiple players. And I see a new wave happening now, and it's the Wi-Fi driven. It's smartphone / Wi-Fi driven. And I don't want us to go backwards. I want us to go forward on it. And why it's based on Wi-Fi is purely, as Steve said, Wi-Fi is an accident of regulation, that there was a small slither of spectrum that was license exempt. And everybody drove the innovation. That's the reason. And we want to build on that. That's why everybody in this conference is walking around using their phones, but connecting, in many cases, to the local Wi-Fi. My roaming hasn't worked since I've been here. I've been fighting with my operator for 3 or 4 days, but it only matters when I'm in the bus between the hotel and here. The rest of the time, I control how I access. And OTT applications are a manifestation of that. I've become the lord of managing my own telecommunications for the first time. When I worked at a mobile operator for 10 years, we used to tell our customers, you can take a phone with that package. And it was pretty much tied to them. This isn't tied to anyone. I can change anytime. So I don't want to go backwards. So when I think free public Wi-Fi, I think let's open the market. Let's allow more players, private sector players. I'm not fully tuned into most of the dynamics in the United States, but the dynamics in the markets where I work are very different. We want to encourage the private sector to play a much stronger role because we want more and more people to offer services to compete. And if one day we get to the point where we have one dominant player like Comcast, then I will want to deal with it, but not in the meantime. So that's my comment on Wi-Fi in general. Looking at rural areas, I think Wi-Fi plays another role. I've seen networks extend for 300 kilometers, providing commercial service over multi-hop, again, Wi-Fi. And in fact, I chaired an organization which had 300 such members. I'm not tied into fiber particularly. I was just mentioning that's a good precursor to public Wi-Fi. There's a huge amount that can be done in the countries where it's allowed in providing massive high-capacity backhaul. And for short distances now, they're talking about gigabit links, gigabit license-exempt links. So the technology is really, it's going to another level, and we shouldn't overlook it. And not only does it allow connectivity in certain areas, but it provides multiple opportunities. When people think wireless access networks, like the organization I chaired, they think rural areas. Not so. Cape Town City Bowl has 5 providers, making a living from providing wireless alternatives in areas which even have fiber. Johannesburg, right in the heart of Sandton, the richest part of Africa, has multiple service providers providing wireless Wi-Fi-based links. We need to think about wireless as a complementary technology at every level. Jumping to one of the other comments on the community networks in urban areas, I don't have a lot of experience except the one in South Africa where, when costs were very prohibitive, these networks started popping up, and they were very geek-driven. You could connect, you could go and look on a map, you could see where people were connecting nearby to you, and you could form mesh networks yourself. You were given the software, you could get an old Linux server, repurposed from your old home computer, and you could start connecting, and it was becoming big. And it's almost dead now. It's limited to a couple of people, and it's because the prices came down so much. So it seemed to me that people really couldn't be bothered to carry on with those networks if the price in the market is right. But that's just my own experience. What it did do, and that was really exciting for us in South Africa, was generate a whole generation of techno-savvy young people who then went into Wi-Fi in different parts of the country and actually turned it into commercial operations. But I didn't see a point in it coexisting when the prices were right in the market, to go to so much effort. But that's just an opinion of mine, based on one set of experiences in about 3 different cities. In
Thanks,
terms
Chris.
of the free basic model, sorry, the last one was about free basic and Facebook. The CSWA is experimenting, but I like the idea, which most of our Wi-Fi operators are doing, of offering a certain amount, whether it be 250 or 500 megabytes a day per user, and then making you pay above that. I like China's innovation that if you pay your rates and taxes in time, you get a double allocation. That is a business case that pays for itself extremely quickly. And I like the idea of free rating, not only certain, say, Facebook, but a whole set of public interest portals. And I think that should always remain free. Just like Wikipedia has created that, why not extend that to the wireless access layer, or to the access layer? And that's actually pretty much what these providers have done. Those are just a few
Chris.
disparate comments.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to comment quickly on a few things. The smart city and whether community networks shouldn't be or couldn't be part of those. In fact, in South Africa, the real driving of broadband take-up from a public point of view and a public policy point of view really happened at the metro level and the provincial level. National was just taking too long. Ultimately, at national, we did catch up and we put some sort of requirements for public Wi-Fi and community thing. But it's really the provinces, and particularly the two big, economically big provinces that have driven it, and their main cities. So both in the Johannesburg model, smart city model, and the Cape Town smart city model are these community networks. As I said, they're not at the core of it. They didn't drive it or anything else, but they're certainly part of that initiative. The interesting thing in the Western Cape, in the Western Cape Broadband Initiative, which this is very much part of, is that the communities, the underserved communities were given priority in terms of getting them connected, and also with the public Wi-Fi, putting the public Wi-Fi in there. And their model, as Chris has explained, unlike the Tshwane model, unlike the Johannesburg, sort of close to Johannesburg model, was that they would provide these public-private interplays. And they took different forms at the provincial level and the private level, but basically people were allowed to connect to the fiber that had gone out, but they were given small subsidies in the one model to connect. And then after a period of time, that subsidy would go and they would have to run the model. And the interesting thing is this conception of community in these modern environments and urban environments. And this was some of the problems with our early universal service models, that, where you got these supply-side driven models, unless there was a genuine community to run it or take it over, or an entrepreneurial model, they never really took off. And I think that they faced the same thing again. The one community that's actually been successful in this model is Delft, which, although it's a completely dislocated, destroyed, post-apartheid, bleak community, they've actually got a very strong core. And that public Wi-Fi network actually is the one that's successfully selling on data. So they've got the 50 megabytes or 100 megabytes that are free, but they're actually successfully selling on. A lot of the other commercial models have actually collapsed. They're not working that well. So I think that actually also relates to some of the universal service models and kind of learning from what we had before, and the questions you were saying about market failure. That when all the initial attempts to provide, secondary universal access to the incumbent, letting another player come in and offer those services that the incumbents historically said were not affordable. When a second player said, oh, well, we'll go in, incumbents were like, oh, actually, we've just worked out we can do it. It's economic to do. So I think what we're finding now is something, slightly different, is that we're in a very changed environment with different levels of complexity and things, and we really need to, and this sort of goes back to the question of governance and that we need to be thinking far more opportunistically about relationships between operators, their moment in time in a particular country, and what can be done. So at that point in time, operators wanted to keep everything in a monopoly, etc. At the moment, they're in a competitive environment. They're required to go and put this spectrum in, some remote part of South Africa or something. It's an obligation for them. But if you actually said to them now, well, if you're not using that spectrum or you're not running an operation there, but you've got that spectrum, and you let that go, and let communities who want to use it, but we're going to give you this high demand spectrum that you want. There are a lot of operators who are quite happy to do that. A lot of them are wanting to get off the second networks. So I just want to say, I think we need to be far more strategic about it, and that really goes to the final point I was wanting about these parallel systems that we've got. If we're speaking about this in this environment, and I absolutely agree with you, Mike, that these are telecom interests that are working through the UN, the ITU system, and that's where they can get their interests best represented. That's where government's representing them. And then you've got this parallel system here, and we're talking about innovation and regulatory innovation and using opportunities, and they're not talking to each other. And I think it's really incumbent on us to get us all in the same room more often.
Thank you, Alison. I'll just leave you with one thought. I'm afraid we're out of time. It wasn't very long ago that it required a national investment and a national operator to deliver services. What we see now is the incredible potential of municipalities, of communities, of individuals to deploy communication infrastructure. And what we need is for the regulatory and investment frameworks to catch up with that. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. It was very nicely attended.
What is the...
Chennai, come up here quickly.
What is the title of the book? Or the author? ¿Cómo se llama?
Sorry, there's never enough.
Arquitectura de la economía, Architecture of Economy.